The autumn wind swept across the Montana plains in 1888, carrying dust through the small frontier town of Red Creek. Wagons rattled over the dirt streets, horses stamped impatiently beside hitching posts, and townspeople gathered outside the county courthouse for an event few were proud to witness. Debt auctions were never pleasant. On that chilly afternoon, however, the crowd had gathered for a reason that made many of them uncomfortable. At the center of the courthouse steps stood Clara Bennett, 22 years old, her hands clasped tightly before her faded blue dress. Her golden brown hair was pinned neatly beneath a simple bonnet, though several loose strands framed her pale face. She stood straight despite the whispers around her. Only 3 months earlier, Clara had been the beloved schoolteacher of Red Creek. Then her father had died. Thomas Bennett, the town schoolmaster, had spent years helping others, often borrowing money to keep the little school open during difficult seasons. When he passed away unexpectedly from pneumonia, Clara discovered that he had left behind more debt than anyone realized. The creditors had come quickly. The bank took their house. The furniture was sold. The savings disappeared. Now Clara stood alone. No family remained. No inheritance waited for her. Only debt. The county officials had decided that the remaining obligations could be settled through a labor contract auction. Though many considered it shameful, the practice still existed in isolated parts of the frontier. Clara's eyes remained fixed on the ground as the auctioneer cleared his throat. Miss Clara Bennett's contract begins at 50 cents. The crowd shifted uneasily. Most people avoided looking directly at her. Not because they disliked her, because they felt ashamed. Among those gathered stood Silas Crow, 46 years old, owner of the largest saloon in 3 counties. Broad-shouldered and richly dressed, he wore a black coat with a silver pocket watch dangling from his vest. His reputation was infamous. Gamblers feared him. Workers avoided him. Women crossed the street when they saw him coming. Silas smiled. "I'll offer 50 cents. A few men exchanged worried glances. Everyone knew exactly why Silas wanted Clara. The smile on his face made that painfully obvious. No one challenged him. No one wanted trouble. The auctioneer nodded. 50 cents. Do I hear more? Silence. Then a voice came from the edge of the crowd. $1. Heads turned immediately. A tall man stepped forward. Caleb Dawson, 38 years old, removed his hat as he approached the courthouse steps. Unlike Silas, Caleb wore no expensive clothing. His brown ranch coat showed years of hard work. Dust covered his boots from a long ride into town. A few streaks of gray touched his dark hair, making him appear older than his years. The crowd stared. Everyone knew Caleb. He owned one of the largest ranches in the territory. More importantly, he was known as a decent man. After losing his wife nearly 7 years earlier, he had become quiet and reserved. He rarely attended social gatherings and spent most of his time working his land. No one expected him to involve himself in this matter. Silas frowned. $1? He asked mockingly. Caleb met his gaze calmly. $1. The auctioneer hesitated. Do I hear a higher bid? Silas narrowed his eyes. For a moment it seemed he might continue. Then he laughed. A whole $1. Imagine that. His expression hardened. You can have her. The words sent a chill through the crowd. The auctioneer quickly struck the gavel. Sold. A murmur spread through the gathered townspeople. Clara felt her stomach tighten. Sold. The word echoed painfully in her mind. For weeks she had dreaded this moment. Now it was over. She belonged to someone. Again. She slowly raised her eyes toward Caleb. His expression revealed nothing. He simply handed over the $1 and signed the necessary papers. Then he turned and walked toward his horse. The crowd began dispersing. Silas Crow lingered. As Caleb passed, Silas stepped closer. This isn't finished. Caleb's voice remained calm. It is for today. Silas smiled coldly. We'll see. He walked away. A knot of unease settled in Caleb's chest, but he ignored it. He mounted his horse and prepared to leave. Then he noticed Clara standing alone. No wagon. No luggage. No destination. Nothing. After a moment, She quietly approached him. Without a word, Caleb offered her a place in the supply wagon attached to his horse. She climbed aboard silently. The journey back to Dawson Ranch lasted nearly 2 hours. Neither spoke. The prairie stretched endlessly around them beneath a sky painted gold by the setting sun. Clara stared across the fields. Her future felt empty. At last, as darkness began settling over the land, she gathered the courage to speak. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You paid for me." Caleb glanced toward her. She swallowed hard. "So go ahead." The word struck him like a punch. For several seconds he simply stared. Then realization appeared in his eyes. She believed he expected something. She believed he had purchased her. Shame and heartbreak filled her face. Caleb immediately stopped the wagon. The horses snorted softly as silence settled around them. "Clara." She kept her gaze lowered. "You think I bought you?" She said nothing. That silence was answer enough. Caleb stepped down from the wagon, then deliberately moved several feet away from her, far enough that she would feel safe. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle. "Listen carefully." Slowly, she looked up. "You don't owe me anything." Confusion crossed her face. "The debt is paid." She blinked. "But the contract?" "I don't care about the contract." The firmness in his tone surprised her. "You are free." The wind rustled through the prairie grass. Clara stared at him, unable to understand. Free? Nobody had offered her freedom in months. Caleb continued. "If you want to leave tomorrow, you can." She looked away. "I have nowhere to go." The admission nearly broke her. Caleb nodded. "I figured as much." For a moment he considered his words carefully. "I have a ranch." She waited. "My foreman has grandchildren who need schooling. So do several neighboring families." He adjusted his hat. "If you're willing, you can stay there." She frowned. "As what?" "A teacher." The answer stunned her. "A paid teacher." Tears immediately filled her eyes. Not because she was sad. Because it was the first time since her father's death that someone had treated her like a person instead of a burden. Caleb looked uncomfortable as the tears appeared. He wasn't good with emotions. Never had been. Especially since Sarah's death. But he knew one thing. No woman should ever have to hear the words Clara had spoken. No woman should believe kindness came with a price. As the wagon continued toward Dawson Ranch beneath the growing darkness, Clara felt something unfamiliar stirring within her heart. Hope. Small and fragile. But hope nonetheless. Neither she nor Caleb realized that far behind them, Silas Crow was already planning how to take back what he believed should have been his. And before winter arrived, that plan would threaten everything. Winter settled gently over the Montana frontier, dusting the rolling hills with frost and turning the pastures surrounding Dawson Ranch into fields of shimmering white. Nearly 3 months had passed since the day Caleb Dawson had paid $1 to stop Clara Bennett from falling into Silas Crow's hands. Life on the ranch had changed in quiet but remarkable ways. Every weekday morning, Clara Bennett, 22, rang the little brass bell outside the old bunkhouse, where ranch children gathered with slates, worn books, and eager smiles. What had once been an empty storage building had become a cheerful classroom. Sunlight poured through newly repaired windows, illuminating handwritten lessons and maps Caleb had purchased during his monthly trips into town. The children adored Miss Bennett. She taught them reading, arithmetic, history, and kindness with equal patience. Watching them laugh reminded Clara why she had become a teacher in the first place. Across the yard, Caleb Dawson, 38, often paused while repairing fences or tending cattle just long enough to hear the children's voices drifting across the prairie. Though he never interrupted the lessons, the sound brought a warmth he had not felt in years. Mrs. Ruth Holloway, the ranch's 61-year-old housekeeper, noticed everything. One evening, as Clara kneaded bread dough beside her, Ruth smiled knowingly. "You've brought life back to this place." Clara looked puzzled. "I've only been teaching." "No," Ruth replied gently. "You've done far more than that." Clara glanced through the kitchen window. Outside, Caleb was helping little Tommy Turner mount a pony, patiently steadying the frightened boy until he found his balance. For the first time since losing her father, Clara found herself smiling without forcing it. Yet peace rarely lasted long on the frontier. One bitter December afternoon, the sound of galloping horses shattered the ranch's quiet. 3 riders emerged through the blowing snow. At their head rode Silas Crow, 46, wrapped in an expensive black wool coat trimmed with fur. Beside him rode Deputy Warren Pike, whose polished badge reflected the pale winter sun. Caleb stepped onto the porch before they could dismount. "What brings you here?" Silas smiled with practiced confidence. "I've come to collect my property." Clara, hearing the voices, stepped outside. Silas pulled several folded papers from his coat. "The county has reviewed Miss Bennett's debt. These documents state she still owes labor under the original agreement." Deputy Pike nodded. "The papers appear legal." Caleb accepted the documents, reading them carefully. Something felt wrong. The signatures looked hurried. The county seal seemed slightly blurred. He folded the papers calmly. "They're forged." Silas's smile vanished. "Careful, Dawson. I've seen official documents before." Deputy Pike stepped forward. "Whether you agree or not, Miss Bennett is ordered to accompany Mr. Crow." Before Caleb could answer, Clara walked to his side. Her voice trembled, but her eyes remained steady. "I won't go." Silas laughed. "You don't have a choice." "I do now," Clara replied. "You belong." "I belong to no one." The words echoed across the frozen yard. Caleb looked at her with quiet pride. Months earlier, the frightened young woman who believed herself purchased would never have spoken so boldly. Silas's face darkened. "This isn't over." He turned his horse sharply before riding away with the deputy. Snow swirled behind them. That evening the ranch gathered around the dining table. Foreman Elias Turner, 55, listened carefully as Caleb explained what had happened. Finally, the older man sighed. "I was afraid Crow wouldn't quit." Clara looked between them. "You knew he'd come back?" Elias nodded. "Men like him don't accept losing." Caleb unfolded another stack of papers from his desk drawer. "I've been expecting this." Clara frowned. "What are those?" "The rest of your father's debts." She stared. "I thought they were paid." "I paid them." The room fell silent. Clara looked up in disbelief. "You, what?" "There were hidden medical bills and taxes." "Why didn't you tell me?" Caleb shrugged awkwardly. "You already had enough to worry about." Tears filled Clara's eyes once again. "You spent your own savings." "It was the right thing." She shook her head. "I'll repay every cent." Caleb smiled softly. "You already have." "How?" "You gave those children their school back." Later that night, Clara found Elias feeding horses in the barn. The older man spoke quietly without looking up. "There's something you ought to know." She waited. 7 winters ago, Caleb's wife, Sarah, became ill. He paused. A blizzard trapped the roads. The doctor couldn't reach the ranch. She died before help arrived. Clara covered her mouth. Elias continued. He blamed himself. He stopped laughing. He stopped dreaming. And he decided he'd never love anyone again. Clara finally understood. Caleb's kindness had never come from obligation. It had come from a man who knew exactly what loss felt like. Christmas passed peacefully, but early in January the storm finally arrived. Not from the sky. From Silas Crow. Before sunrise, nearly a dozen armed riders surrounded Dawson Ranch. Silas rode at their front. "This ends today." Caleb stepped onto the porch carrying only his rifle. Behind him stood Jacob Miller, Elias Turner, and every ranch hand. Clara remained inside despite every instinct telling her to stand beside Caleb. Silas called out, "Hand her over, and nobody gets hurt." Caleb answered calmly, "No." Silas signaled his men forward. Then another sound rolled across the valley. Hoofbeats. Dozens of them. From every direction. Neighboring ranchers appeared over the hills. Men Caleb had quietly helped during droughts. Families whose cattle he had rescued. Former soldiers who had once served beside him. Even parents whose children Clara now taught. Within minutes, Silas found himself hopelessly outnumbered. Another wagon approached. County Judge Samuel Whitmore climbed down carrying official records. Beside him stood 2 United States Marshals. The judge raised his voice. "Silas Crowe, we've examined the documents. The labor contract is fraudulent. The county seal was forged. The deputy accepted a bribe." Deputy Pike's face turned white. The marshals stepped forward. Silas attempted to flee. He barely reached his horse before being pulled from the saddle and placed in irons. As he was led away, he glared at Caleb. "This isn't finished." Caleb simply answered, "It is now." Silence settled over the ranch. Neighbors slowly returned home. Snowflakes drifted gently from the gray sky. Clara walked onto the porch. For several moments neither she nor Caleb spoke. Finally she looked up. "That day outside the courthouse." He nodded. "I remember. I thought you had bought me." "I know." She smiled through tears. "You never asked for anything. I never wanted anything you didn't freely give." She reached into her coat pocket. Inside was the faded $1 auction receipt Caleb had quietly handed her weeks earlier after settling the paperwork. She looked at it one last time, then tore it cleanly in half. The pieces floated into the winter wind. "No one ever owned me," she whispered. She stepped closer. "But I choose you." For the first time in 7 years, Caleb Dawson allowed himself to believe happiness was still possible. He gently took her hand. Months later, when spring returned to Montana, the restored Red Creek Schoolhouse opened its doors once again. Children filled the classroom with laughter. Caleb watched proudly from the doorway as Mrs. Clara Dawson, still only 22 but wiser than hardship had any right to make her, welcomed a new generation of students. That evening, beneath the endless Montana sky, the townspeople gathered outside the little white church to celebrate the marriage of the quiet rancher and the courageous teacher. Everyone remembered the $1 auction. But that was no longer the story they told. Instead, they spoke of the man who proved dignity was worth more than money. The woman who refused to let suffering define her. And the simple truth that changed both of their lives forever. Love cannot be bought. It can only be freely chosen.